This is the end of the Champions League as we know it. The final season with 8 groups. Next time onwards, it's going to be a whole other format. And let's call it what it is. It's UEFA's version of the Super League. And what a send-off to this format. With some exciting groups, especially a group of death that gets a reaction like this. Newcastle. Group F! Holy, we got the group of death! Holy! Oh my god. We're going to go through our predictions from each group, go through the teams and see which of the teams will qualify for the round of 16. And let's kick things off with Group A. As Matt Slater of The Athletic would call this, the most 90s throwback group. The 1999 Champions League final played between Bayern Munich and Manchester United. Here's the craziest stat about Bayern Munich, guys. Bayern Munich is yet to lose a group stage match in 6 years. They lost in the quarterfinals last season against eventual champions Manchester City, but this will be Thomas Tuchel's first full season at the club. And he's chasing his 12th consecutive Bundesliga title. Now, they've gotten rid of some big players like Lucas Hernandez, Sadio Mane, Sabitzer, Jan Sommer, so there have been a wholesale amount of changes at Bayern. At the same time, this particular team felt like they were lacking a striker last season, which is why they went all out on getting Harry Kane to the club. Honestly, that desperation can be seen in the fact that they broke their transfer record. Bayern Munich are a financially reasonable spending club. So for them to spend this much to get Harry Kane shows the desperation for an attacker they had. And at this point in time, it looks like that investment is paying off. 3 goals for him in 2 matches. And he'll be hoping that the former Spurs player comes back to the Old Trafford and scores against Manchester United. United themselves, a team that is finally back in the tournament after taking a 1-year break. But there's some concern that the shine of Erik ten Hag hasn't worn off from this team because they've started this season a little bit patchy. The first game against Wolves, they were not the most convincing and they got kind of lucky not getting a penalty conceded against them. Then they lost 2-0 to Spurs, were completely dominated in the second half. And in their match against Nottingham Forest, yes, they won 3-2, but at one point in time, they went down 2-0. United fans have also kind of given up on Antony, and they're questioning the club's management for the high fee that was paid for Mason Mount to bring him from Chelsea. But they might be a little bit of a tough side to predict. If we go back to last season, they had a slow start last season too, and then they ended up doing pretty well, including lifting a trophy. And they'll have to get some important wins against especially teams like Copenhagen. If you look at Copenhagen, the team that has won their 15th Danish league title, that at this point in time is a joint record. And Copenhagen last season in the Champions League, they didn't really get out of their group. They finished bottom of the group, but they did play Manchester City and they did manage to pull off a draw against that side. So this time around, they'll be hoping for something similar or definitely a lot more if they want to get out of this group. And then there's Galatasaray. At this point in time, guys, this pot 4 was ridiculously stacked. And this Turkish side, which would be a perennial side in the group stage, is coming back after not qualifying for 4 straight seasons in the competition. This to me is one of the better sides in pot 4, and we got some more reunions. Wilfred Zaha, who moved from Crystal Palace to Galatasaray, goes back to a Premier League side. And the permanent move of striker Mauro Icardi makes this team relatively strong as well. However, my prediction from Group A, Bayern and United, even though United are a little bit patchier right now, I think they'll still pull it off in this competition. In Group B, a group that Slater rightfully calls the most Europa League group. The only good thing that has happened to Sevilla in the past few months is their 7th Europa League title. Outside of that, the Spanish side are in deep trouble. Yes, they won the competition last year, but in the league itself, they finished 12th place, 9 points away from relegation. And this summer, the club listed their entire squad for sale because apparently they're 100 million euros in debt. Recent reports suggest they're on the verge of selling star player Lucas Ocampos to Fulham. And on the field, it's not that much different. If anything, Sevilla right now are sitting 20th in La Liga. If there ever was a group that Sevilla wanted, this probably would be it. Alongside Sevilla, it's Arsenal, a team that has missed the competition for 6 straight seasons. And Arsenal had a dream run last season. They almost won the Premier League title. They really only have themselves to blame for not lifting that trophy. And probably because of the experience that the Manchester City squad had. But will Arsenal show the same lack of experience in the Champions League this season, having not played in the competition for 6 years? Or will the last year's campaign be a good learning curve for them, which will translate into a better showing in the Champions League? Seeing their group, they'll be pretty happy that they don't have that much competition because the team in pot 3 that they got placed with is PSV Eindhoven. PSV booked their ticket into the group stage after beating Rangers in the qualifier 7-3. A strong team at home, PSV did not lose a single match last season at home in the Europa League. And in the knockout stage, they eventually lost to Sevilla, a team that they've been put in the same group with this time around in the Champions League. For a lot of people, this is where this French side actually belongs. However, when it comes to the club coefficient rating in the entire competition, all 32 teams, Lens is actually ranked right at the bottom. One of the shock teams from last season, Lens actually lost the Ligue 1 title to PSG by 1 point. However, the team has seen a couple of their star players leave. Openda went to Leipzig, Fofana has gone to the Saudi League, and in this group, I'm a little bit more confused as to who I'm gonna pick. I think Sevilla's out. I don't think they make it out of the group stage. Arsenal will make it through. Between Lens and PSV, I'm a little bit confused, but I think I'm gonna have to give the edge to PSV Eindhoven. I'll be honest, guys, I won't be too surprised if Lens gets out of this group, despite of being in pot 4. Napoli became the champions of Italy after 33 years, and in spite of coach Luciano Spalletti walking away and losing star center back in Kim Min-jae, Napoli haven't looked too bad this season. 2 matches in, although they don't look the best as they were last time around, they've picked up all 6 points, and led by their star attackers in Kvaratskhelia and in Osimhen, Napoli won't be an easy side in the group stage. And I know they'll fancy themselves after getting Real Madrid from pot 2. I think they would have been a little bit relieved after seeing the teams that came out of pot 3 and 4. But then there's this Real Madrid side, a side that didn't win the La Liga last season. They crashed out of the Champions League semi-final against Manchester City and saw their rivals in Barcelona lift the La Liga title. So this time around, Ancelotti would for sure want to bring that title back to Madrid. However, the club will see some massive changes this time around in the Champions League. This will be Madrid's first appearance in the Champions League without Karim Benzema in 15 years. Asensio's also gone. They likely won't have Courtois back this season. So they've made some serious changes in their squad. New signing Jude Bellingham has completely hit the ground running. They've started off the La Liga season with 3 away matches. They've won all 3 of them, although they were a little less convincing in the match against Celta Vigo. They've already put 9 points on the board, and from this particular group, I think Madrid will feel very comfortable that they'll be able to get out. Braga managed to find their way into the Champions League group stage after beating Greek side Panathinaikos in the qualifiers. And last season, Braga were relegated from the Europa League into the Conference League, and they eventually lost in the knockout stages against eventual finalists Fiorentina. Now, Braga will probably try to make sure that they at least get into the Europa League knockout stage, but they'll have to outdo Union Berlin to get there. And Union Berlin is one of those sides with a dream story. They've qualified for their first ever Champions League tournament, and they did that 4 years after getting promoted to Bundesliga. And this time around, they've kicked it off pretty much the same way they did last season. 2 matches in, they've picked up all 6 points, they sit on top of Bundesliga, and for me, Napoli and Madrid go through to the knockouts, and I think Union Berlin will make it into the Europa League. But sitting on top of the group is Benfica, a side that has been the Portuguese champion 38 times, finally won the title again last season after a 4-year hiatus. And Benfica have looked to build their season with some important signings coming in. They brought a goalkeeper that was being followed by a bunch of European clubs, Ukrainian player Trubin to Benfica. They signed Kokcu for 25 million, and Angel Di Maria, who finished his time at Juventus, made a move to Portugal. And that move is pretty much paying immediate dividends. 3 matches in, he's already scored a couple of goals. Their main competitor from the group has to be Inter Milan, the finalists from last season. And simply put, Inter are probably one of the best teams in all of Serie A. Outside of a dip in quality in their goalkeeper, where Onana left for Manchester United, to me, this team feels like it is upgraded in all departments. The signing of Benjamin Pavard from Bayern Munich, that definitely upgrades Inter's backline. Their midfield with the addition of Fratesi, honestly, probably the best midfield in the entire league. And if Lautaro Martinez can carry on the form that he's shown from the first couple of games, Inter are definitely one of the Scudetto favorites. And from this group as well, I think they'll be pretty happy. One of the teams that they're going to be playing against is RB Salzburg, a side that their rivals AC Milan played last season. The Austrian side won the league pretty comfortably last time around, but they've lost a couple of important pieces to their team, especially in attack, with the departure of Benjamin Sesko going to Leipzig, Noah Okafor making a move to Milan. They did finish 3rd in their group last season, and it's possible that that's probably where they'll end up this time around. Now, with Sevilla's win in the Europa League last season, La Liga has 5 teams in this Champions League edition, and one of those sides is Real Sociedad. This will be the club's first appearance in this competition in 9 years, and I think they'll probably be competing against Salzburg to get into that 3rd spot for the Europa League, because I think the 2 teams from this group that are going to be going into the knockout stages is going to be the favorites Benfica and Inter Milan. And with a little bit more competition in La Liga getting tested week in and week out, I think Real Sociedad will probably end up making 3rd place in the Europa League. The only other side that benefited from Manchester City winning the Champions League title last season was Feyenoord. Pot 1 is supposed to consist of the Champions League winner, the Europa League winner, and the champions from the top 6 associations. However, since City won the Champions League title and the Premier League title, the 7th association in Netherlands actually got to send their champion into pot 1. And that's probably one of the only reasons why Feyenoord ended up in the group that they did. And their first competition in the group is going to be Atletico Madrid. Now, last season, Atleti was a tale of basically two halves. The first half of the season, this team deeply struggled. They finished at the bottom of their Champions League group in a group that was relatively easier for them. You'd expect them to actually top that group. They completely crashed out of the tournament. However, their reaction in the second half of the season, led by their coach, was phenomenal. 23 matches, they won 15 of them and ended up pulling off a third place finish in the league. So if Atletico Madrid can bring their form from the second half of last season into this season, they'll have a fairly easy time in their group. A group that sees another Serie A side in Lazio joining them. Lazio somewhat surprised Serie A last season, finishing in second place. They finished behind champions Napoli, but ahead of Champions League semi-finalists in AC Milan and Inter Milan. But with the loss of star player Sergej Milinkovic-Savic and seeing the performances that they've put in over the first couple games of the season, I think their fan base might be a little bit concerned. The usual Saudi magic seems to be missing from the team a little bit, and I think for them, this is exactly the group that they were looking for, because the fourth team from this group is Scottish champion Celtic, who pulled off a domestic treble last season, but a team that usually in the Champions League struggles to get out of the group stage. The last time around they got out of the group stage was over a decade ago, and from this group, my picks to make the knockout stage would have to be Atletico Madrid and Lazio. Even though Lazio seems a little bit weak in the league right now, I think the expectation would be that Saudi can get control of this team. And in the Champions League competition, I think they got put in a group that they can actually handle. Feyenoord, for me, goes into the Europa League. And then there's Group F, appropriately termed the Group of Death. In my opinion, and I know in the opinion of a lot of people watching, this has to be the best Champions League group I have ever seen, top to bottom. The group has a perfect mix of history, money, success, and a pretty exciting future for all of these teams. Kicking things off with PSG, this is the new age PSG. Their attack is significantly changed with the departure of Neymar, with the departure of Lionel Messi. At the beginning of last season, I still remember PSG's president making a remark about how the club wants to become a little bit more humble. And I don't know if the departure of some of these strong and big figures in Neymar and Messi was part of that pursuit to become a little bit more of a humble club. And that doesn't mean not signing big players. It just means signing the right players for a particular system and not just the big name on the back of the shirt. They've still spent over 200 million this transfer window. They've brought in the Champions League winner from 2015, Luis Enrique, as their new coach. And with that experience of actually having won the tournament, will PSG be able to get that Champions League monkey off their back? Because the teams that are standing in their way are pretty strong, starting off with Borussia Dortmund. Now, Dortmund had a golden chance to stop Bayern Munich from winning their 11th straight Bundesliga title. And I'm sure their fans' hearts are still breaking, especially the way it unfolded on the final match day. Now, having lost their star man in Jude Bellingham, Dortmund reinvested those funds into signing Sabitzer and Mecha. However, it is a little bit unlikely that they'll be able to fill in that creativity void that is left by the departure of the English player. And their season is also kicked off with a little bit of a hiccup. The past weekend, they drew against a side that almost got relegated last season. And it's not just the competition from PSG. Their other competitors are AC Milan and Newcastle United. Now with AC Milan, here's the interesting thing. As a Milan fan, watching this draw, it wasn't really a draw, a group that filled us with fear. It actually filled us, at least myself, with a lot of excitement. The potential to test ourselves against some of the bigger sides in Europe and being part of that group of death is actually something that I'm looking forward to. And I think part of the reason I feel that way is because this Milan team is actually really good. 2 years ago, Milan got back into the Champions League. Their first season back in the Champions League, they finished bottom of the table. I'm sure that taught the team a lot of lessons. The second season back in the Champions League, Milan made it into the semifinals. I'm sure that taught the team very different lessons compared to the first season. Now, if this team, with its coach and the star players, can take the lessons that were learned in the first failure and then the second go around making the semifinals, I think that'll make AC Milan a very strong team in this group, and they'll really fancy their chances of being able to get out into the knockout stage. Newcastle have made their way back into the Champions League after 21 years. Now, the way that they were able to crack into the Champions League, making top 4 last season, was pretty interesting. A lot of people believe that maybe this time around they won't have the same luck, mostly because they saw teams like Chelsea and Liverpool slip up, and they believe that those teams will actually be able to get back into the Champions League, and that'll probably push teams like Newcastle out of the top 4. However, kicking off the start of the new season, they actually looked pretty decent in the first match, had a dominant performance, but the next couple matches, they haven't been their best. Sure, it was a loss against Premier League champions in Manchester City, but in their most recent matchup, they were up 1-0. Liverpool had a red card. Newcastle had 60 minutes to play that game, 1-0 up with a man advantage, and at the end, in the final 10 minutes, they conceded 2 goals to lose 2-1. To me, shows a lack of experience in big moments. And the Champions League is really all about that. It's all about experience and being able to capitalize on the big moments. And then in this group, there's 3 different connections to AC Milan. Newcastle United just signed Sandro Tonali from Milan. Milan's new signing Christian Pulisic will head back to Borussia Dortmund. I do see both of these players getting a good welcome from the other side. However, after a bitter divorce with Milan for Gianluigi Donnarumma, his return to the San Siro with PSG, that would be a toxic environment. And from this group, the 2 teams that I picked to get out are going to be PSG and AC Milan. I think there's a very good chance with PSG, with their experience, are probably going to end up topping the group. And I feel fairly comfortable in saying that Milan will be able to get past Borussia Dortmund, and I think the lack of experience of Newcastle will come into play again, and it'll be PSG and Milan that get out of this group. I do think Newcastle United will finish 3rd. Group G, as characterized as all over after 4 games group, I think this is a pretty accurate description. Manchester City managed to win their first ever Champions League title, pulled off their first ever European treble, and this time around, there's not much of a difference. I think City are still pretty much favorites to win it all. And you know, City are actually notorious for starting off the Premier League season kind of slow, and you'd think after winning the European treble, they'll actually take their foot off the gas a little bit. But no, they've won 3 out of 3 of their opening matches, picking up all 9 points, which hasn't happened since the 2016 season, provided 2 of their opening 3 matches were against sides that just got promoted to the Premier League. But still, it gives you a good gauge that this team is still not satisfied. Now, their main competition from the group will have to be RB Leipzig. Some believe Leipzig is actually the team that is most likely to compete against Bayern Munich for the Bundesliga title this season. Even though they've lost a bunch of their players in Guardiola and Kunku, the German side's high propensity to be really busy in the transfer market and make a lot of signings, some would argue they've actually ended up kind of upgrading their squad from last season, especially with attacking additions like Benjamin Sesko and Luis Openda. Last time around, the team that beat them out of the competition was actually a team their group with now in Manchester City. It was an embarrassing 7-0 loss in the round of 16, so Leipzig would definitely want some revenge for that this season. The 3rd team in the group that they're gonna have to deal with is Crvena Zvezda, better known as Red Star Belgrade. Now, the last time a team from Eastern Europe won the Champions League title was Red Star Belgrade, but it was about 31 years ago. And in more recent times, this side has actually failed to make the Champions League in 3 consecutive seasons, crashing out during the qualifying phase. So will they be much of a competition to the other 2 teams? I don't really think so. And then there's Young Boys. The Swiss champions were able to get into the Champions League group stage after a comfortable win against Israeli side Maccabi Haifa. And in their last appearance in the Champions League group stage, they were actually able to get a surprise win against city rivals Manchester United. So can they possibly get a repeat of fate and actually this time around beat Manchester City? From this group, I think it's relatively easy to predict. I think these 2 sides are going to be getting into the knockout stage. And then there's Group H, which is perfectly termed by Matt Slater as the World Cup 2030 bid group, as teams from all 3 countries, Spain, Portugal, and Ukraine, are put in the same group. Now, here's what was the good news for the Spanish side. Because they won the La Liga title, they were going to be in pot 1 alongside Bayern Munich, which meant they couldn't be in the same group as Bayern. So that's a massive bullet dodged. Now, for 2 years in a row, Barcelona have failed to get out of the group stage. So their first goal for this season will just be able to make it to the knockout rounds. Now, last season, Xavi's Barcelona won 11 matches with a 1-0 scoreline. Xavi's Barcelona during his playing days, they didn't really struggle to score goals that much. So they'll definitely need to be a unit that can create far more chances this season. And to kick off this campaign, they have scored about 6 goals in the first couple matches. Now, if Barcelona can match last season's defensive strength that actually won them the title and partner up a better attacking side that creates more opportunities, they'll be a tough side in this Champions League edition. The biggest competition to this side has to be Porto. Now, Porto won 3 trophies last season, but in the 2 most important competitions to them, the League and the Champions League, they saw Benfica lift the Portuguese title and lost to eventual finalists Inter Milan in the round of 16. The 30-time Portuguese champions have started off the season pretty well, winning their opening 3 matches. However, their fortunes could change slightly if they are to let go of their star striker in Mehdi Taremi. At this point in time, the Iranian striker is going through some really complicated negotiations with Milan, and everyone's waiting to see if this deal actually happens before the closure of the transfer window, because the Iranian striker has been the side's leading scorer in the past 3 seasons. The Ukrainian champions only managed to get a 3rd place finish in their group in the last season's Champions League. They were sent to the Europa League knockout stage and they lost 8-2 to Feyenoord there. So they'll probably be expecting to go back into the Europa League competition. Their main challenger for that spot will have to be Royal Antwerp. Antwerp surprisingly beat the Greek side AEK Athens in the qualifiers to make it into the group stage. However, to me, this group seems a little bit more clear-cut. I think Barcelona and Porto will make the knockout stage, and Shakhtar Donetsk is probably going to go back into the Europa League. Well, there you have it, guys. Those are my predictions for this season's Champions League. Again, it's going to be the final time that we're going to be seeing 8 different groups. It's going to be more of a league format. It'll probably bring out a little bit more exciting competition. We'll probably see better teams play each other more frequently from next season onwards. Let me know in the comment sections which predictions you agree with. And if you like this kind of content, make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification so you can watch these videos as soon as I upload them. And to my Milanisti out there, as always, Forza Milan, grazie mille e ciao tutti!